Compañeros, welcome to the SQL Data Partners podcast, the podcast dedicated to SQL Server related topics, which is designed to help you become familiar with what's out there, how you might use those features or ideas on how you might apply them in your environments. I am Carlos L. Chacon.
And I am Steve Stedman. We are two data professionals trying to help others get a better handle on their database environments, either through this podcast, our training, or our consulting practice. Thanks for joining us on the SQL Trail. Welcome to the show.
SQL Data Partners.
Hey, compañeros, welcome to episode 78. In today's episode, we have Brian Carrig. He is the DBA manager at ChannelAdvisor, and we're going to be talking with him about their migration to SQL Server 2016. They actually had access before it became available and worked with Microsoft based on some of the specific problems they were having with their environment. And we're going to talk a little bit about their migration strategy and some of the things, the features that they're using and why they decided to use it. As always, I'm joined with Steve Stedman.
Hey, Carlos. I think one of the things with the interview we've got coming up here is there's some really good stuff that would help anyone that's considering migrating to SQL Server 2016 in the near future.
Exactly. While we'd all like to do that, but probably sooner rather than later, eventually it will get to us. And I think the other big key is just recognizing or understanding why you might want to upgrade and take advantage of how you could take advantage of some of those features.
Yep.
Rather than just keeping up with the latest version.
Sure. But before we get into that, there's a few mentions that have been sent our way on Twitter.
Yes, that's right. We heard from Andy Levy. Andy, thanks for leaving a comment on the podcast page. Has been listening for about 8 months and enjoys the show and invites us to keep up the good work. So Andy, thanks for leaving your message, and we, of course, will continue plugging away here.
Yep. And we had another comment on Twitter that came from Anthony Nocentino.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry if I've done anything to mess up the name there. I think that's the right way to pronounce it. And he said, excellent podcast on storage testing with Argenis. And that was episode 75 that we did a couple weeks ago. That one was, well, as always, they're a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But thanks for the feedback, Anthony.
Yes. And if you'd like to leave a comment, you can do that on SQLDataPartners.com/podcast. We'd love to get your thoughts on the show. So we have a new year. We've done one episode. So this is the second episode of the new year. And we're going to try to start doing something that we call SQL Server in the News. That name might change over time.
SQL Server in the News with Carlos and Steve.
Yes, and our most professional studio voices.
Yes.
And so we thought we'd just bring up one or two items that either changes or functionality that has been announced and talk about it for a second. Yeah, so in 2016, there were no shortage of announcements from the SQL Server team. And so this by no means is all of them, and we'll be talking about a couple of them in future episodes, but we thought we'd start with a couple. The first being that when SQL Server, the Express Edition, and I guess even the other SQL Server editions being available in Windows containers.
Nice.
And in Linux containers, right? So this is kind of a new feature. Now, containers in general are something that I'm not quite sure that I completely understand. I haven't been working with them at all. And we actually do have another episode here in a couple of weeks that will be coming out, and we'll be talking about containers and SQL Server and how they coexist. So we'll have that. But that was the feature for 2016 Express Edition and Windows containers was made available last year.
You know, another in the news item that's come out recently was SQL Server 2016 Service Pack 1. And normally when you hear Service Pack, you're thinking, oh, nice. They've just fixed a few bugs, stabilized a few things. But with 2016 Service Pack 1, they've actually changed some of the licensing around specific features that were previously only available in Enterprise Edition.
Yeah, that's right.
And they've taken many of these features and they've made them available in Standard Edition, Web Edition, some of them in Express Edition, and some of them even in Local DB. Some of these features include things like change data capture and database snapshotting and Columnstore indexes, partitioning.
Yeah, all the in-memory stuff.
Yep. The in-memory OLTP, always encrypted, polybase. I mean, all kinds of things here that previously you could only get with Enterprise Edition. And I have a feeling a lot of this was to sort of go head to head and compete a little bit stronger against Oracle with their efforts to take Oracle on.
Yeah, interestingly enough, that's probably there, but actually MySQL, from the analytics perspective, MySQL is a big player there. And I think they're getting a little bit of pressure in that space from all the data science components. And currently in the data science and analytics, MySQL is actually the front runner. SQL Server is number 2. So I think they're trying to make a push in that direction, including R in SQL Server, of course, is all in that general family of functionality as well.
Okay.
I remember watching the Connect event and seeing Scott Guthrie there and on stage and give that presentation. And it was phenomenal to hear that. And of course, then Twitter exploded and everybody kind of reacted to it. But yeah, lots of changes there.
Yep. And just everything that was previously an Enterprise Edition feature that's available. It's only a subset. There's still things that you need Enterprise Edition for, like transparent data encryption and online index rebuilding and a handful of other things.
Yeah, some of the features from the availability groups.
Yep, absolutely. But there's a lot of this now that you can get in the standard edition, which is just spectacular.
Yeah, again, it kind of seems to revolve a little bit, with the exception of the always encrypted, it seems to revolve around the analytics components.
Yep, but good stuff there.
Yeah, so that's SQL Server in the news. I think that's going to do it for us. A couple of things we wanted to talk about. I wanted to remind everyone that our SQL Server checklist is out on GitHub. So if you're interested in contributing to that, that's an opportunity there for you to contribute, kind of give your ideas and 2 cents, make that a little more available for others. And as things continue to change, we'd love to get your experiences there as well.
Yep. And you know what I think is nice about that is if we get more input on that and update that, here's the update with everyone's suggestions and perhaps build one of the best SQL Server setup checklists out there.
Yeah, it's interesting. There is still lots of, even though people aren't necessarily installing SQL Server, it's still something just to reference, because as they're going in and reviewing environments, it's just kind of okay, am I set up correctly?
Absolutely. I've found that, a lot of those setup items get missed when a SQL Server initially gets built. The people who set it up are not always the ones who know the right things to do for the SQL configuration.
No, that's right. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and welcome Brian to the show. Brian, welcome.
All right. Thanks.
Hey, Brian, good to have you on the show.
Yeah, good to be here.
Thanks for coming in. I know we're all a little bit under the weather. The winter weather has kind of come and done its worst. So thanks for taking a little bit of time with us. So ultimately, our conversation today is about your experience in migrating to SQL Server 2016 and what that experience was like and some of the challenges that you had. So I guess first, set us up with that story. What's ChannelAdvisor doing, and why did you feel the need to upgrade to SQL Server 2016 before it was released?
Okay. Just to give some background, I guess not everybody will know who ChannelAdvisor are and what we do. So we're an e-commerce software as a solution provider. We've been software as a solution since 2001, since probably before the name existed. Yeah, what we do is we help retailers and brands to sell online, right? Marketplaces like eBay, Amazon, Walmart, Jet. There are actually hundreds, possibly thousands of these marketplaces throughout the globe. Basically, we help companies to sell across these marketplaces, manage their inventory, all that kind of stuff, so that they don't have to worry about writing APIs for all the various marketplaces. They can just interface with us, and we will manage their inventory, manage their online sales, digital marketing, all of that. And so we power about, I think, 3,000 retailers. Yeah, with some pretty big customers, Macy's, Samsung, Under Armour, Staples. Yeah, there's quite a lot of big names in there. Before I moved to the US, you mentioned my accent. When I go home to Ireland, people say I've lost all my accent. So apparently not.
My dad's the same way. My dad's from Costa Rica. He came here when he was 15, lived here for 30 some odd years, goes back to Costa Rica now. And the people are like, is Spanish your first language? He's like, yep.
Yeah. Well, when I go home, they say I sound like an American now. So
you've been Americanized.
Yes. So we recently just went through what we call Cyber 5, right? Thanksgiving, that whole weekend, Cyber Monday. And during that weekend. Last year, we powered close to I won't say this year's because I believe the results are not actually official yet, and I don't want to get in trouble with the SEC. But suffice to say, we do a lot of processing during that weekend, and that's kind of what drives our usage of SQL 2016, or why we wanted to move to SQL 2016.
So that's your peak usage time.
Yes.
So then, given that that's the peak usage time, I would assume that probably in July and August, you're really starting to ramp up for that. Is that about the right time frame?
Yeah, generally we're trying to get the infrastructure in place probably around July, August, and kind of gearing up then for the load in the fourth quarter. And then based on just natural growth, we might see a bit of a dip in Q1 of 2017, say, and then we start to ramp up just from natural growth, and we have to kind of get ahead of that. And,
Sure.
And SQL 2016 is probably the version of SQL Server that has had the most attention paid to performance improvements in quite some time, probably since the 2005 release.
Right.
I believe, I won't say they promise, but it's not atypical to get 20% performance gains just right out of the gate. So that's what interested us. We're quite sensitive to cost, even though we have quite a large SQL infrastructure, because we make money when our customers do. So if we just go crazy and deploy a huge amount of infrastructure, we can impact our own profitability.
Sure. Now, is any of that, using cloud technologies, or is it still all on-premise?
Pretty much everything we do is on-premise. We do have a footprint in AWS. We have some customers where we run SQL Server in AWS because we have geographic restrictions on where their data can reside. So we leverage AWS's data center in Ireland, actually, to run their workload.
Okay, gotcha. So now you were an early adopter, I guess. So what was that process like?
It was fantastic. I can't compliment the SQLCAT team enough. It was a real eye-opening. I've had terrible experiences with Microsoft support prior to this, but this is another level entirely.
Sure.
It was really enjoyable.
Well, so you mentioned you were looking for a 20% increase, or at least that's what the marketing was telling you, right? So you get it in, you get the SQL Server 2016 version. How do you go about testing that and kicking the tires to see what it's going to do for your environment?
Right, that is difficult, right? Currently, we have 118 SQL Server instances in production. I think it's close to 3,000 databases. Our environment peaks at about 1.6 million transactions per second. It's really, really hard to get a dev environment that reflects that.
Sure.
But, we do what we can. In particular, we knew we had some problem areas. And one of them was in-memory OLTP. We've been using that since SQL 2014. While the performance gains were incredible, the feature set's kind of limited in terms of what data types and a SQL syntax you could use.
Sure.
We also had a lot of stability in memory OLTP, particularly around the checkpoint engine.
So what type of issues did you run into with that?
Oh, okay. I think I filed a connect item on this, or somebody did. It was fixed in a hotfix, but we had an issue where if you ran out of transaction logs, basically your transaction log filled, and even before autogrowth could kick in, the checkpoint thread for the in-memory OLTP engine would die and fail to respawn. So the only way you could kind of get the process to restart was to take your database offline and bring it back online, which in highly transactional environments is problematic.
And given that checkpoint file is really the only place that new data is going to exist, I can see how big of an issue that might be.
Yeah, so the first time it happened, we didn't notice, and the transaction log on this server was 600 or 700 gigabytes. It did not get truncated until it filled. We basically had a full transaction log that was 600 gigabytes in size. It ended up being quicker to restore the database from backup versus taking the database offline and having it start and go through crash recovery.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now that's
a lot of roll forward.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a scenario you see every day. That's on the 2016 environment? That's 2014.
That was on the 2014 environment. Now, they actually fixed it in a service pack for 2014, but that was the point at which we were kind of looking around and saying,
like, okay, we need something different.
Yeah, we heard that they had rewritten a lot of the engine for in-memory OLTP and SQL 2016. Apart from performance gains, that was another thing that kind of prompted us to go, hey, we'd really like to get on 2016 as quickly as possible.
Any other changes to the in-memory objects, if you will, or was it really just like, I need a new version?
There was the stability side, but also availability of constraints. I think that using it,
Like, I need a new version.
there was the stability side, but also availability of constraints. I think that using in-memory OLTP has become a lot more viable now that constraints are available in terms of foreign keys and default constraints and unique constraints.
Now, remind me, so for the foreign keys, the in-memory objects, can I have a foreign key from an in-memory table to a, what do we call it? Not in-memory table?
Disk-based tables?
Disk-based tables? Yeah.
I actually do not know. I have not
Okay.
tried that.
You're talking about foreign keys between two in-memory tables?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I wasn't sure. I didn't think that was an option, and I thought, okay, well, maybe that had changed. So, okay. Can you tell how many in-memory tables do you actually have?
Right now, I want to say 3 or 4, so it's not extensive. It could be more. Kevin designed a lot of them, so he'll probably correct me after this. Kevin Fiesel.
Yes, another excuse to get Kevin back on the podcast.
I want to say 3 or 4 of the regular in-memory tables that sit in a database, but what we're using extensively now, and I don't know if enough people know about this, is you can create a table type that is memory optimized and use this as a table variable, either as a table variable in a procedure, or if you use TVPs, you can pass it in as a TVP. We've seen some incredible performance gains from this, and it's really simple to implement. I think in my Ignite talk, I give an example where we reduced the CPU consumed by a procedure by about 75%.
So when you're doing it that way, basically you're kind of skipping tempdb for the type of tables that would normally go into tempdb, and you're doing it as a memory only in-memory OLTP table. Is that right?
That's right. It doesn't touch tempdb at all. So what we were finding after we deployed SQL 2016 and we got those kind of performance gains that we mentioned is that you're just shifting the bottleneck to somewhere else. So where we started to see some stress was contention in tempdb around reading and writing from the system tables. The way we looked at reducing that was to basically take some of the load off tempdb by using memory optimized TVPs.
How do you take into account the memory considerations now? Because, I mean, obviously one of the things with memory optimized objects is that you have to account for that in memory now. Previous to that, it was just like, we'll allocate, 85% or whatever the percentage was of the memory to SQL Server and be done with it. Now we have to carve that up a little bit neater. Can you talk to us about how you decided to do that? Or?
Yeah, certainly. So if you read books online, they say for your fixed tables, right, not temporary objects, that you should allocate about 3x the size of the table. But really what it depends on is what your frequency of insertion and deletion from that, how much work does the background garbage collection process need to do, and how much overhead do you need to handle all the row versions, essentially. And typically, if you're looking at in-memory, you probably have a really high frequency of insert and delete and update type operations.
Right. That's why you're using it, right?
Right. It wouldn't be a problem if your table wasn't heavily
used,
accessed. You wouldn't be looking at this. And also, concurrency, because the wider and more sessions that are doing this, the more versions that will be held in memory.
Oh, gotcha.
We have found that in cases you might need to allocate as much as 10x.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And when we talk to a company called bwin, these are like the pioneers of in-memory OLTP. They've worked a lot with SQLCAT. They've got some great white papers out there about using in-memory OLTP to really boost your performance and the amount of transactions that you can support. And they had some experiences.
I admit I don't have extensive experience with the in-memory objects, but knowing, so the recommendation is plan for 3x, but you're seeing a 10x increase, I guess, for the DMVs, or what are you using to then monitor how much memory the tables are actually taking up?
So I use Resource Governor, and there are also DMVs that will tell you how much memory it is using. One of the tricks that you can do, and I recommend doing this because in a lot of cases, your big concern is that you will run out of memory and you will cause the server to crash. If you just have memory optimized objects in one database, you can use Resource Governor to bind that database to a resource pool and fix the amount of memory that it can use. If you run out of memory that you've allocated to that database, queries will fail, but your server will stay stay up.
Yeah, that's a very creative approach there, I think. Oftentimes, resource governor sort of gets downplayed a little bit as not being that useful, but I mean, that sounds like a great way to be using it.
I love resource governor.
A little bit as not being that useful, but I mean, that sounds like a great way to be using it.
I love resource governor. There's not many people that use it, but we use it extensively here.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That might be another topic because I agree. It seems like a resource governor is kind of on the wayside, but scenarios like that do make it very appealing.
Because we're multi-tenanted and we have a lot of different product teams that often use the same database infrastructure, we use Resource Governor sometimes without doing any actual limiting or governing of resources. What it does is split your plan cache. So if you happen to have teams that use procedures in different ways, they get their own plan cache and you can reduce parameter sniffing issues.
Oh, interesting. So another question around the in-memory OLTP, and this is kind of a concern that I came across as I've been exploring it. Partly comes from my background with database corruption and CheckDB and things like that. But CheckDB and CheckTable won't check in-memory OLTP tables. And I guess, is that something that you have problems with?
We have not encountered any problems with that. Yep. It's definitely a concern. I mean, the tables that we use for in-memory OLTP are largely can be thought of as like staging tables for ETL processes. And obviously we extensively use the memory optimized TVPs. And just to talk about, hopefully not to kind of frighten some of your listeners off too much, if you're just using the memory optimized TVP, so these are all temporary objects, you probably won't even notice the amount of memory that's being consumed by in-memory OLTP. Because they're so short-lived.
Yeah, exactly. It'd be almost like temp tables, right? In a sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
But no, we haven't encountered any type problems there. We have encountered corruption on our disk space tables, but nothing in the in-memory OLTP space yet.
Okay, well, that's good news on the in-memory OLTP side.
So the corruption on the disk happens, I guess there's something gets switched there. As long as the database knows what records are there, I guess how could it would have to become corrupt? Wouldn't that then affect more of your hardware?
The thing I've seen, and I experimented with this a little bit, is if you have corruption in one of the checkpoint files where all the changes are tracked in that in-memory OLTP table to the checkpoint table or checkpoint file, if one of those is corrupt, you're not going to know it. And the only way you are going to know it is when you try and back it up, either with a full or differential backup. And at that point, your backup's going to fail. And it'll tell you that it's usually a checksum error that you'll see. And then you can't actually back up the database. And your only point at that, or the only thing you can do at that point is go to a previous backed up version of that database.
Did you have anything else you wanted to add there, Brian?
The checkpoint files are really just used for recovery purposes, right? And also for the backups. So in that scenario where you encounter that the backup has failed and you have some kind of storage corruption, presumably your actual data will be fine, right?
Well, if you're pulling that data from another table that's a disk-based table, yeah, it'll be great. But if it's going into an in-memory OLTP table, that data may only exist in that checkpoint file till it gets backed up. I mean, in-memory OLTP is definitely a huge performance gain there, and it sounds like that's what you're using it for, and you're definitely seeing those results.
Yes, I think our plans for 2017 definitely involve more in-memory OLTP.
But that's not the only feature that you're using in 2016.
No, another feature that we're using extensively is Query Store.
Right. And this made waves just recently because they enabled it by default in Azure SQL Database.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
So they may be, who knows, then, SP2, it might become available. This is not pure conjecture. This is not an announcement in any way, shape, or form. But I could see that coming in future versions, it being enabled by default. But currently, it's not.
Yeah, I could see it. And even during the preview TAP program, they were changing the defaults almost on a monthly basis. I don't know if anyone was paying a lot of attention to the CTPs. Almost each month, they got tweaked. They got tweaked, yeah.
Yeah, I know when I talked with Borko, the PM, about that. We were looking at those usage patterns. They wanted to get that feedback, see how people were using it and being more responsive, if you will.
Yeah, for us, because we have a lot of ad hoc queries, the switch to clean up queries that are not frequently used was important.
Okay. So I guess we should review quickly what the Query Store option is. From my perspective, right, it's tables that are inside the same database that is going to keep a record or a history of all the executions that have happened on your database for further analysis.
I think that's fair. I think Borko describes it as a flight recorder for your database, and I think that's a really good description.
Yes, that's right.
So it keeps a record of all of the queries as they execute and then the plans that they use. So even though probably the primary use case is that, right, looking for plan changes that are problematic, there's a lot of that's in there that you can use for other things as well. Even
Sure.
Cases where maybe queries that are aborted or canceled or time out for some reason, that's all data you can pull out of there.
Right. I know from the DMV perspective, you can only see either cumulative totals or the last execution counts. And so, that scenario where this morning I was having a problem, but now it seems to run fine. There's not much you can do about it now.
Yeah. So we typically, prior to Query Store, we would typically run Atom Mechanics, who was active, every minute and dump that to a table. So we would have some kind of history of what's executing when a developer or customer comes to us and says, hey, there was an issue an hour ago or 2 hours ago. What happened, right? It's really hard to tell. So that's what we use that for. And now Query Store is kind of like a more enhanced version of that.
Okay, interesting. So, you talked about aborted queries, that you're starting to understand better. Other things that you're getting out of there that maybe you hadn't thought of before or weren't seeing before?
Well, we used plan guides. I won't say extensively, but we certainly have areas where we use plan guides. And if anybody has worked with plan guides to force plans, Query Store is amazing, right? You execute a procedure, you pass in 2 parameters, and your plan is forced. None of this messing around with like huge blocks of XML or trying to capture the correct plan from the cache.
So you're actually saying I can go back into Query Store, I can capture the plan. I have 2 plans, one's good, one's bad, and I basically say, I want to use this one.
Yeah.
And that's your plan guide.
Yeah. Now it is a force. It's not, hey, would you mind using this one? It's you're forcing it to use this plan.
Sure. Well, that's kind of an interesting option. And I say this only because I was just writing test prep questions. And so I've been looking at force. So the force is kind of an interesting option. Any plan is really, and so I've been looking at force. So the force is kind of an interesting option. Any plan is really a force, right? You're telling it, you need to use this instead of what you think you need to use it.
Well, sure, but you're not giving the optimizer a choice. So the optimizer is being told, here's your plan, execute that.
And I think that seems like a much more direct and guaranteed way of using plan guides rather than saying, here's a plan guide and here's some suggested hints to use.
Yeah, certainly what we have found is that we're often using hints to try and get to the plan that we want. As you say, this is more direct. Here, I know the plan I want, use it.
Right.
That should be a pretty rare scenario. Usually the best thing to do is to leave it to the optimizer to figure out the best plan.
Right.
But there are always those edge cases you have to deal with.
I've seen that where, like, if somebody adds a bunch of hints into a query that then make the query behave poorly, you can then use the plan guides to Query Store. That'd be extremely useful.
Yeah, you could use it to address the same problem that plan guides largely are used to address. Cases where you can't edit the query to put hints in there, so you use plan guides to force the behavior that you want. You can use Query Store in the same way. So if you deal with a lot of ISVs and you've got issues with parameter sniffing, this could be a way to address it.
Very good.
Yeah.
So the last feature you want to talk about is the Columnstore indexes.
This is one you're definitely going to have to get Kevin back in for.
Yeah.
He is our Columnstore guru.
Yeah. So one thing I've always, because the example that they frequently give for the Columnstore indexes is like state, right? And I'm like, okay, I get it. State makes sense. I want to, because I'm constantly grouping by that. I'm reporting by that, things of that nature. So that makes a good candidate for a Columnstore index. But outside of that, am I just basically looking for, that makes a good candidate for a Columnstore index. But outside of that, am I just basically looking for common things that I am either grouping by or reporting on? And that's where I want to go for my Columnstore indexes?
Possibly. One of the things that maybe kind of gets overlooked a little bit is just how good the compression can be on Columnstore. And a lot of your performance gains might be from that. So we had a case where we had a 4 terabyte fact table that was reduced down to about 600 gigabytes in size by making it, a clustered Columnstore index. Also, you can generally reduce the amount of non-clustered indexes that you need, basically rearrange your table as a column store.
I guess that's the new feature in 2016 is that I can now create that as a clustered index, whereas before I couldn't.
Yeah, you can basically mix and match now. So you could have clustered column store with non-clustered B-tree indexes, or you can have probably less common, right? You could have a regular B-tree clustered index on the table. Yeah, and one of the gains now as well with 2016 is batch mode execution for column store.
Right. Batch mode meaning being able to update and write to? Yeah.
Yes, it will. Yes, it will execute in batches, and you can get considerable performance gains there.
Very cool. It's always good to talk with other folks about, why they're doing certain things, how they're doing them. A lot of times, even on our podcast, sometimes we get kind of carried away. I think we always try to dive into why we're doing that. But discussions like this, help bring the problem a little bit more to the front. And then how are we going about solving that? Should we do SQL Family?
Yes, let's do SQL Family then. So one of the first questions there is keeping up on technology. How do you keep up with technology and all the changes that are happening, specifically around SQL Server?
It's kind of easy in here because we have so many people working here who are really into SQL Server. So everybody can be everybody else's filter. So everybody's kind of looking at blog posts and so forth. We have a very, very active user group in Triangle area. So yeah, basically just conversations at work will usually keep you fairly in the loop.
Yeah, that's interesting. So Brian, you're actually the third person from Channel Advisor we've had on the podcast. We've had Mark. Mark Wilkinson was actually the first. And then Kevin, and then now yourself. Yeah, so we run into your folks from time to time. Of course, being on the East Coast.
Yeah, I think you've got like maybe 10 more SQL professionals to go if you want to get the whole set.
Only 10. There we go. How did you first get started with SQL Server?
So in a previous life, I was a Linux administrator, mainly working with MySQL. The company I worked for at the time took on a project. They didn't have any in-house developers, so they took on a project where the project was going to be developed in Delphi, so it needed a SQL Server backend. Nobody else was around to manage it, so I did.
Okay.
And started from there.
All right. And then if you could change one thing about SQL Server, what would it be?
Apart from the licensing cost, I will say TempDB. I think that's a major bottleneck for SQL Server still. I would definitely like the ability to allocate TempDB on a per database basis.
Oh, gotcha.
Great. So a little bit of background then there, Carlos. This question about changing one thing with SQL Server, where did that originally come from?
Yes, that we reached out to the audience and asked them what questions we should be asking, and Brian came up with that one. It's been a good one, right? Lots of different thoughts there.
So need to give credit where credit is due.
I only realized just before the show I didn't necessarily have an answer myself.
Yeah, it's much easier to ask the questions than it is to answer sometimes.
So I'm going to credit the leader of the user group in Dublin for this piece of career advice, a guy named Bob Duffy. Some of you in the SQL community have probably heard of him. And the advice was that I should sit the Microsoft Certified Master exam. When they announced that it was going to be closed, I kind of assumed my chance was gone. He was the one who really said, no, just go for it. And I kind of squeaked in at the end there.
Wow. Okay.
Literally
very good.
days before it finished.
So if you could have one superhero power, what would it be and why would you want it?
Okay. I was going to say the amazing power to reduce SQL licensing costs. I don't know if that's but actually, now that I think about it, I think flight would be good. I fly over and back to Ireland. When you're paying the ticket for 4 people, it kind of adds up. So if I could just fly everybody over with my superhero power, that would work out great for me.
And I will be looking for that comic book of the new superhero that reduces the SQL Server licensing costs.
Marvel, if you're listening.
Book of the new superhero that reduces the SQL Server licensing costs.
Marvel, if you're listening, it was our idea first. Okay. Well, Brian, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Thanks, Brian. It's been fun.
Thank you. Happy to be on here.
We'll tie a nice bow on the end of that, Brian. But thanks so much for being with us. And we do appreciate the conversation.
No problem. Happy to do it.
Awesome. So upgrading can always be a little bit tricky. And I don't know that I can imagine trying to upgrade to a version of SQL Server that wasn't available to the public yet.
Yep. Those early previews are nice as long as you can get the support to go with them.
That's right. And it sounds like they were getting that support, and Microsoft was invested in some of these partners. And we see the videos when we go to the conferences about these early adopters. And it's nice to get their, I won't say the quote unquote real experience, but something that's not been polished, but they seemed very, very happy with it.
Yep. And I think another thing that's really interesting with this is the size of the environment they're working with, the number of instances, the number of databases, and the amount of transactions that they're doing, and that they were able to really get significant performance gains right out of the box without having to do much other than getting the upgrade done.
Yeah, no, that's right. And being able to take advantage of the 2016 is just really a very feature-rich version. Some of these, like the in-memory objects and whatnot, have kind of finally graduated and are ready for prime time. And obviously, Channel Advisor is putting that to good use.
Yep.
So, okay. Well, that's going to do it for our show today. Of course, if you want to give us feedback or talk to us, you can do that on Twitter. I am at Carlos L. Chacon.
And I am at SQL EMT.
You can use the hashtag SQL Podcast as well to leave your comments, or go to the website at SQLDataPartners.com. The show notes for today's episode are going to be SQLDataPartners.com/2016. If you want to get the several links that Brian mentioned about those in-memory options, we'll have those available there for you. So SQLDataPartners.com/2016. That'll do it for us this week. So, compañeros, thanks for joining in again, and have fun on the SQL Trail.